They called it a land grant scam, where official-looking colonial documents were sold as proof of ownership, and buyers paid, believing they had secured rights to land that governments had never actually granted. These documents carried seals, signatures, and formal language, and they described vast tracts of land supposedly issued under colonial authority. Agents presented these grants as rare opportunities, explaining that early buyers could claim ownership before settlements expanded into those regions. Money moved through direct payments, and buyers received papers confirming their legal rights to land they had never seen. The documents referenced specific territories, boundaries, and issuing authorities, creating the appearance of legitimate colonial approval. A comparable situation unfolded in the late 18th century, where land deals based on questionable authorization triggered widespread disputes and loss of trust. Investors treated these grants as transferable assets, expecting to claim land, resell it, or establish settlements based on documented ownership. Some buyers began planning relocation, assuming that possession of a grant guaranteed access to valuable territory. Requests to verify these claims were delayed, and agents assured buyers that administrative confirmation would follow. As more grants circulated, overlapping claims began to emerge, raising questions about whether the land had ever been officially assigned. What appeared to be legal ownership backed by colonial authority was actually a system where documents were sold, but the land itself had never been granted. In 1795, a major land deal in Georgia revealed how large territories could be sold through questionable authorization, shaping expectations around land ownership long before proper verification systems existed. During the colonial period, land ownership was often defined through grants issued by governing authorities, and these documents were treated as legal proof of entitlement to specific territories. Colonial administrations distributed land through written grants, describing boundaries, rights, and conditions under which the land could be claimed and used. Buyers relied heavily on these documents, as physical verification of distant territories was difficult and often impossible for most individuals. Land grants were transferable, allowing ownership to be sold or reassigned through paper transactions without direct inspection of the land. Maps and written descriptions became the primary reference for ownership, and possession of a grant was often considered sufficient evidence of control. Communication delays and fragmented record-keeping meant that confirming whether a grant was officially issued could take significant time. Authorities maintained records in local offices, but these records were not always centralized or consistently updated across regions. Investors viewed land grants as valuable assets, expecting future settlement, agricultural use, or resale opportunities based on documented ownership. This environment allowed documents to carry authority independent of physical reality, creating a gap between what was written and what was actually granted. As demand for land increased, the reliance on documentation grew stronger, reducing scrutiny over the origin and validity of grants. That dependence on written authority created the exact conditions where colonial land grant scams could sell ownership rights that had never been officially issued. Promoters created the colonial land grant scam by offering documents that claimed to represent official rights to unclaimed territories, and buyers paid up front, believing they were acquiring legally recognized ownership. These grants were presented as issued under colonial authority, and agents explained that large areas were being opened for settlement, making early acquisition highly valuable. A nearly identical structure played out during the Duchy of Poyas scheme, where land rights were sold based on documents that described a territory far different from reality. Each grant described boundaries, coordinates, and conditions of ownership, and buyers relied on these written details as confirmation of legitimate entitlement. Money moved through direct transactions handled by agents and intermediaries, and receipts were issued alongside the grant documents. Promoters emphasized scarcity, suggesting that land was limited and that delays would result in lost opportunities. Investors purchased multiple grants, expecting to claim land, resell portions, or establish settlements based on documented ownership. Decisions followed these expectations, with buyers allocating savings, forming partnerships, and preparing for relocation based on the granted territories. The opportunity relied on authority by appearance, where official language, seals, and formatting created trust without independent verification. Promoters expanded sales by issuing additional grants for the same regions, increasing transactions without confirming actual authorization. As more grants circulated, the number of claims began to exceed any land that had been legitimately issued. This gap between documented ownership and official authorization created the opportunity that allowed the colonial land grant scam to grow. The colonial land grant scam operated by turning official-looking documents into sellable assets, where each grant represented ownership of land that had not been formally issued by any authority. Promoters drafted these documents using correct legal language, referencing colonial powers and including boundaries that appeared consistent with real territories. Seals, signatures, and formatting were replicated to match legitimate grants, and this visual accuracy reduced suspicion among buyers. Each document described specific regions, and buyers were led to believe they could claim or develop the land upon presenting the grant. Money moved through direct payments, and buyers received certificates that appeared to carry full legal weight within the colonial system. The same territories were assigned across multiple grants, allowing overlapping claims to be sold without immediate detection. Records were maintained by promoters and intermediaries, but these records were not connected to official registries or verified issuing authorities. The system relied on delayed verification, where buyers accepted documents first and attempted confirmation only after transactions were completed. Decisions followed these documents, with investors planning settlement, resale, and development based on assumed ownership rights. Because the land was often distant or unverified, buyers had no immediate way to confirm whether the grant was recognized by governing authorities. As more grants were issued, the gap between documented ownership and actual authorization widened across multiple claimants. This mechanism allowed the colonial land grant scam to process transactions efficiently, while distributing ownership rights that had never been officially granted. As early buyers accepted their grants without immediate verification, promoters expanded the colonial land grant scam by issuing more documents tied to the same territories. Agents moved across regions presenting these grants as confirmed opportunities, encouraging new buyers to secure land before further distribution reduced availability. Additional documents were created referencing identical boundaries, increasing the number of ownership claims without any new land being officially assigned. Money continued to flow through repeated transactions, and new buyers relied on the authority of the documents rather than verifying their legitimacy. Decisions escalated as investors committed larger funds, formed partnerships, and prepared plans to settle or resell portions of their claimed land. Local discussions began treating these territories as active opportunities, influencing expectations around expansion and future development. Promoters introduced variations of grants, offering different sizes or priority rights, creating multiple tiers of ownership within the same regions. Internal records tracked increasing sales, but these records remained disconnected from any official issuing authority or recognized registry. As more grants circulated, overlapping ownership claims became inevitable, though this remained hidden due to delayed verification. Buyers who attempted to confirm their claims were redirected with assurances that administrative processes were still underway. The continued expansion of documents reinforced confidence, even as no official confirmation existed behind the grants. This phase allowed the colonial land grant scam to scale rapidly, increasing financial inflow, while the underlying land rights had never been legitimately issued. As buyers began seeking confirmation, inconsistencies emerged between the grant documents and official records, and claimed territories could not be matched to authorized land distributions. Some investors attempted to validate their ownership through colonial offices, only to find no corresponding entries for the grants they held. Conflicts surfaced when multiple buyers presented documents describing identical boundaries, each claiming exclusive rights to the same land. Requests for official verification revealed gaps in authorization, and authorities could not confirm that the grants had ever been issued. Intermediaries provided inconsistent explanations about the origin of the documents, and the chain of authority became unclear. Buyers who planned relocation or development began questioning their claims, as no infrastructure or official recognition supported their ownership. Refund requests increased as doubts spread, but payments were delayed or redirected without resolution. Authorities began receiving multiple complaints, prompting closer review of the documents and their supposed issuing bodies. Comparisons between grants revealed repeated patterns in language and formatting, indicating that documents had been replicated rather than officially issued. Communication from promoters became less direct, shifting from detailed assurances to vague statements about ongoing administrative processes. The absence of verifiable authorization became increasingly evident, as no governing body could validate the legitimacy of the grants. These warning signs exposed the growing disconnect between the documents sold and the land that had never been officially granted. The colonial land grant scam came to the surface when groups of buyers presented their documents to colonial offices, and officials confirmed that no such grants had ever been issued under their authority. Verification attempts escalated as registries were checked, and records showed no matching entries for the territories described in the documents. Conflicting claims intensified when multiple buyers submitted identical boundary descriptions, and authorities identified duplication across numerous grants. Formal inquiries began as complaints increased, and officials reviewed the documents, signatures, and seals, confirming that they had no legal standing. Buyers attempted to claim land or assert ownership, but their documents were rejected, and no legal recognition was granted to their claims. Decisions reversed as investors abandoned relocation plans, canceled development efforts, and attempted to recover funds that could not be returned. Disputes emerged between buyers holding overlapping claims, and no resolution was possible because the land had never been officially assigned. Financial losses became clear as the resale value of the grants collapsed, and documents that once appeared valuable lost all credibility. Promoters reduced communication and withdrew from operations, leaving transactions unresolved and records incomplete. Authorities issued warnings or statements clarifying that the grants were invalid, reinforcing the absence of legitimate authorization. The system that had processed ownership through documents broke down once verification replaced assumption. The colonial land grant scam collapsed when official confirmation exposed that ownership had been sold on paper, but the land itself had never been granted. The colonial land grant scam followed a repeatable structure where authority was simulated through documents and official appearance replaced verified authorization. Promoters separated payment from legitimacy, allowing money to move immediately, while the existence of valid grants was never confirmed. Buyers relied on written claims, seals, and structured language, treating documents as equivalent to legally recognized ownership. The system enabled duplication, where identical territories could be assigned across multiple grants without immediate detection. Intermediaries reinforced trust by recording transactions, creating the appearance of a functioning system disconnected from official registries. Verification was delayed by distance, fragmented records, and administrative complexity, allowing the scam to expand before being challenged. The exposure phase showed that verification only occurred when buyers attempted to claim land or authorities reviewed inconsistent records. This pattern demonstrates how systems can be manipulated when authority is assumed rather than confirmed at the source. Real-world outcomes followed, including rejected ownership claims, financial losses, unresolved disputes, and loss of trust in future land transactions. Comparable historical situations show that document-based ownership systems remain vulnerable when verification mechanisms are weak or absent. The critical failure was not only the fraud itself, but the system's reliance on documentation without independent validation. The lesson remains consistent. When ownership is defined by what is written rather than what is officially granted, the system itself becomes the scam.